Today is Monday, March 11th, 2022, which makes it the 5th anniversary of my first upload to this channel, so I thought I'd commemorate the occasion with an overview of the evolution of my music. Now, if you're relatively new to the channel, you may not have even known I've been doing this since before 2019, and I can't quite blame you. Almost none of my pre-2019 work is still visible on the channel, and has been sitting in private and or unlisted categories of my platforms for the last year or two. Unless you're looking at my SoundCloud. Upload limits dictated the old work and gets the axe out right. That said, all is in part for sake of putting my best face forward, because you would not believe the number of people on Newgrounds who saw my earliest music and assumed I never improved past that. Hence much of the drop in stagnation of my viewership there. A lot of my growth has gone hidden, and I thought it would be good to display an overview of my growth in history. Flashback to early spring of 2017. I got a lot going on in my life at this time relative to my experiences up to this point, and no way to express myself. Because every way I tried in the years prior proved to be frowned upon. So I needed a new way to vent, and decided to do basically the one medium I hadn't tried yet. Music. A lot of searching for budget-friendly options there, because I am broke at this time. And eventually I settled with Foundation. It's basically what you'd get if Apple decided to make GarageBand a cloud-based service, and then, in total Apple fashion, put 3/4 of the sample library and all the actually user-friendly mixing plugins behind a paywall. Does that sound too generous to warrant Apple in comparison? Because Foundation's got you covered. After 2019, they now require a subscription service to export your projects at all. So if held down, SoundCloud, you're a GarageBand wannabe. This is not your weight class. Anyway, so I opened up Foundation for the first time, and if anyone was watching me work on my first song, you would see very quickly that I had no idea what I was doing. You ever see that one meme template with the ape just tapping away randomly on the typewriter? Yep, that was me. Not a single thought before I posted under the original DJ Neutralizer name for the first time, and it showed in the original Night Visions. Needless to say, response to this was deadpan.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Not a single like or positive comment to this day, regardless of what platform it was on. And after having put your ears through that, you can't blame people. Neither can I in retrospect, especially since it told the world this is the only way I express myself, and I can't even do that. If you knew the point of my music back then. But for as absolute garbage as that song was, there was one section that, well, still trash, but a little less trash. Anyway, most of my subsequent works end up like this on some level, barely a damn given for tempos, compositional logic, sound design, but always just that one glimmer of hope that, just maybe I won't be dog shit forever. I do get a little better with my sound choices and composition, but while a solid improvement to denote significant change is most evident in my early 2018 song, False Dark, False Light, it's still definitely not a level that you'd actually listen to. Yeah, remember what I said about just that one glimmer of hope? Yeah, that part was that glimmer. Song on the whole couldn't decide whether it was a sorry excuse for Imagine Dragons' Believer wannabe, 1990s freestyle EDM song, or an early 2010s rap beat. Not a good combination, so I kindly advise for your sake that you not seek out the full song, so you don't have to listen to the rest of that torture. Next song, to mark a shift, A Date with Destiny, my first collab. Did mark an improvement, yes, but let me tell you, I have not one clue why the other artists put up with my incompetence. As much as they took the reins on the composition and made it acceptable, that song just could not escape my touch. If the Midas touch turns things to gold, my pre-2019 touch turns things to shit, as you probably figured out by now. So the song ended up having a similar identity crisis because of my sound selections, this time between being able to decide whether it was hard techno, orchestral, or a boss theme. And this time it's got the extra apparent mixing issues to go with it. The mixing problems didn't go away for quite some time, but at least I got cohesive in my own composition and sound choices in the months that followed. I'd say for that time, it came together best in my song Revolution, which, despite all my effort, showed basically no semblance to the song that inspired it. But hey, I could make something that could stand up on its own 2 feet for a change, I guess. Not long after, however, coming largely out of left field for my music at this time, I pulled out a completely orchestral piece, albeit a rather repetitive one. While I didn't quite know it, back then this would come to be the first real traces of what's not a significant part of my music. Albeit it had its own evolutions to go through before then, as did the other aspects of my music. All this while, however, I've been saving to upgrade to a more professional DAW, spending all of 2018, and basically every spare dollar I got in it, to buy myself a producer edition of FL Studio. It wasn't easy, if I'm being honest. I was still too young for most employers, even at the minimum wage jobs, to be willing to hire me, and didn't have a high school diploma yet either, so I had to be real frugal with what money I got. Matter of fact, I remember there were days I'd skip meals entirely just to save a few extra dollars towards this program. That worked out, I suppose, since at the start of 2019 I was able to finally buy FL. I have to give credit to Henix here, because had he not taught me how to use the program properly, that my job probably would have gone to waste. Anyway, with FL now in hand, I get to work producing my first song on the new DAW, EXO, and it came out simple as the main melody, but if you're one of the people who's seen the MIDI to this, you'll know this is a song your left hand does not want to have to play on the piano. That said, this song, for better or worse, was definitely a DJ neutralizer song. Spare sounds on the main melody, accompanied with saw-based sounds beneath it, mixing issues, overly complex, basic chord progression, EDM tempos. It was all the main traits of my music in the prior 2 years or so, all in one song. But it was absolutely nothing like the very next song I made, and that's perhaps why that next song I released, Loyalty, has had so little lasting relevance in my fan base. Which is funny, considering that despite still having its imperfections, it, by a stroke of sheer luck, ended up my best mix song, not just up until that point, but best mix I would make for another year and a half at least. For its time, it was a blinding light of hope that I'd be on track to go places in no time. And that's completely snuffed in the very next song. Well, there's always next decade to get relevant. In any case, though, you can definitely hear by now that the difference between 2017 me and 2019 me as a musician is night and day. So this brings me to think, maybe it's time to revisit old ideas for real. Because by this time, I'd actually done a handful of remakes of older songs of mine, like Line and Fire and the Golden Days, but did I really have much growth between the originals and the remakes?
Ha! No!
This time I did, though, and it's with that new experience I revisited Night Visions. Yep, that completely incoherent piece of crap that started all this. It's one that I looked at and said, this had an idea. No, not ideas, that's being too generous. Just idea singular. So I salvaged most of the bridge composition and made that into the main theme to the remake in a somewhat inverted fashion to how the second drop of DJVI's New Era became the bridge to the bass after bass. So the following is what came out of my work on that remake. Definitely a step up, but once again, largely went quietly into that gentle goodnight, albeit a bit more deserving of that quiet end. But not as deserving as the freaking slaughter that was deserved by my remix of Z's Freedom Dive later that year. Mixing and bass composition on that remix was absolutely garbage in retrospect, in my opinion. It's muffled and otherwise a tad awkward. So, why am I even talking about this? Because apparently Newgrounds only has ears for garbage when it comes to my discography, and boy did the ears tune in for this one. To this day, this mess somehow still stands as a work of mine to get the most views from a single platform of anything I've ever made, standing at exactly 11,576 listens on my Newgrounds page as of writing this script. Not too far behind in tow in the release order was this one little dubstep song I made, and well, there's nothing to write home about on the mixing as far as my songs this time go. But it's absolutely a feat of sound design for what I've made up to that point, and while we're at it, arguably the direct ancestor of some of my greatest works. Good thing I screwed this one up on the title, eh? So I was a bit cocky at this time, or at least overly optimistic. I thought this song would be a huge step towards it being able to go toe-to-toe with some of the biggest names on Newgrounds like X-Troller. So in that cockiness, I decided I'm going to call this song Signature, in X-Troller's language, so as to say, I can do your signature style now. Problem. I don't speak Finnish. And Google Translate is dog shit. So what I later learned is that this song's title actually translates approximately to chaplain. Talk about throwing mixed messages on a song like this. While that song definitely doesn't hold up today, it's still a solid song for its time. Yeah. Most of these songs earn their mention for being good relative to their time, and this meets that requirement. It's better than most things I was making at this time. But have any of you ever heard of a song that's known mainly for how bad it is? Anyone who's been following me in recent years knows exactly what song I'm about to talk about. Say at least 2019 me is still cocky beyond warrant about my music. Well, even months later, after that dumpster fire. Some of the DJVI's Discord server's equivalent of Gordon Ramsay calls me out on the flaws in my music. I decide, screw you, I'm going to put this out anyway, because it's great as it is, and you can't tell me otherwise. Because to be frank with you, this is a dude whose ego was so inflated at the time that he thought even at 13 years old and even just only 2 to 3 songs into his music-making career, he's already among the top 3 greatest music producers to ever live. Only dude he seated was better than him was Virtual Riot, but this dude even had the nerve to say that DJVI himself was nothing next to him. And, well, DJVI eventually pulled this kid aside and told him, you're not one of the greatest of all time right now, and you won't be if you keep that attitude. So in my head, I'm thinking, with that reputation of yours as the kid who thinks he's the greatest thing ever, everyone else is crap. Why is your opinion me a damn to me, right? And that is where my song, Magic, begins its story. So that was that for a few months. And, well, he didn't tell me otherwise after that. An infinitely bigger fish in the pond sure as hell did, though. Cut to March 2020 when Arcade, music producer with a 6-digit subcount, makes an entire 27-minute long video that picked apart this song's mixing to the bone like a vulture. To be fair, nothing mean-spirited about it, though. Had a bit of a clickbaity and misinforming thumbnail, but a tad overkill to go that long on just one song, right? He most certainly had a point in what he said, though, as he demonstrated what he would have done, and he was right. It does come out better the way he did it. So that was a wake-up call I'd say I needed regarding my mixing that time. Albeit not one that would be acted on just yet. And as a matter of fact, counting remixes and such, an entire 16 uploads from me would go by before I start acting on this nudge in earnest. One of these 16, though, has proven to be arguably the icon of my channel in the 2 years since its release, and to be frank with you, it does not have the mixing or composition to warrant it. So what put it where it is? One thing, and one thing only. Memes. I'd done remixes of meme songs before, but this was my first time legitimately creating a brand new one. And say at least that Comic Factor made a hit in my listener base, as well as the only song I've ever made that gets self-remixed in chronological order by Laughter, Neon Fire, and March 234. Plus, who knows how many we'll remix in the years to come. Hell, most people rarely even think of remixing a song of mine that isn't. Bruh. In the following 4 months or so, I quietly worked out how to improve my mix, and eventually unveiled all this improvement all at once in my remix of Silva Hound's Addict. Albeit I still had further to go, but the improvement over my other work in the last year and a half or so was clearly noticeable. For this, I have not just Arcade, but also Oshin to thank, and watching their videos seriously helps give me a sense of direction improving my mix. And while I do have to agree that at the end of the day you should let your ears have the final say in your mixing, I do recommend that less experienced producers watch tutorials that address mixing that actually gives more specific numbers that you should shoot for, because these at least provide you with starting markers for gain staging and EQ. In the mixes, advice of just tweak around until it sounds good. You look at my older work, and for one, it speaks to my dogshit taste at this time, but also why I should not just rely on what sounds good to me, because that was good enough to me at the time, and yet to me now, to all of you now, it is unbearable. In any case, what I learned from Oshin and Arcade's tutorials brought me to the mixing you hear in this clip. Some 2 or 3 months, more mixing changes, and I'm revisiting past compositional ideas later, I end up creating what, to be frank, is probably the most generic song my channel has ever seen, and might ever see. In a way that ends up working in its favor by virtue of its mainstream style. Doesn't matter. Intro's a tad lackluster, but beyond that, this is a tropical house song if you've ever heard one. Anywho, hot on the heels of what could at the time be called a sample of the most corporate, spoon-fed unoriginality that dominated mainstream electronic music post-Avicii for a few years, came the first album or EP of mine to see commercial release, Aeon. And this was a speed ran album of my music post-2018 new one. 8 songs made in the span of about 3 months, while I was still regularly releasing singles at that time. As though I didn't have this going on under the hood at all so I could have the album out by Christmas. Some might complain that the album felt a bit repetitive, and maybe one might think to attribute this to Russian nature, but largely seemed to go unnoticed is that this album is actually intended as almost something more of a suite, like you would hear in orchestral compositions from a few hundred years ago. The entire album goes in with the intention of one overarching idea, to which 3 of the 8 songs, Eureka, Anathema, and God Complex, established this idea's motif in a way similar to how a song has multiple choruses. What the Rush did do, however, was look like a regression in the mixing quality. In spite of this, one song in the EP appears to have caught the attention of a good portion of my audience, and they would not approve of this video if I didn't give the song a mention. Quote. Oh, Astra? Damn, I really like Chronos. Anyway, Astra, which tries to harken back to some of F777's late 2000s style, got almost all of the positive feedback this album earned itself. Some consider it my first particularly good song, an assessment I disagree with, but I digress. The song I find a bit more impressive, however, came out of my discography shortly after, but while I was under a new name. So around the time that the Aeon album comes out, I'm going around asking some slightly bigger producers for advice and possibly some collabs, because I want to grow this channel. And one of the people I go to is Capacity. Among the advice he gives is to change my artist name, because in its current state it's too lengthy and complicated for almost anyone to bother typing, let alone attempt to pronounce if they never heard it before. Yeah, he had a fair point, so I decided to change to a name that was more concise and marketable, but still me. So I decided to poke fun at what's wrong with me in the head, and go by the name Lycan starting in early 2021. Sounds all well and good, right? Well, not really. In short, what I didn't know, but should have done more research on, is the fact that about a dozen people got to that name before me, and because customer service on Repost Network, the distribution service I use, is questionable just like its parent company SoundCloud, I couldn't separate my music on Spotify and other platforms from those of a few others who use the name. So overall, big problem that plagued me for a whole year. This is why you don't write off check yourself before you wreck yourself. Anyway, as I had alluded to earlier, my music generally goes in with the intention of expressing some emotion behind it. But, what about half a dozen? Enter The Necromancer, which, alongside its sequel that admittedly came the better part of a year behind schedule, had some fans of mine go so far as to call it my magnum opus. A little too early to be dishing out that word, but I'm not sure it'll be me who grants that title when the time comes, so what the hell. Over the course of the 7.5 minutes that comprises some of its 2 parts, the song tells a complete story that manages to have a definite lore and yet remains open to interpretation, weird as that sounds. This said, rather amusing to think that my brother mistakenly believes all this spread out of this one throwaway villain from a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Yet the inverse actually ends up being true, as the song serves in part as inspiration for a bigger villain I tried to run in a campaign of my own. His story, unlike the one to this song, unfortunately never got to finish being told, but, if nothing else, the song still exists to carry that story's roots. Following the first part of this, however, came what would end up being possibly my biggest hit out of all of my original songs, and ironically enough, that success came from a relatively expensive blunder on my part. So after The Necromancer, I released Ignite, my very first slap house, and might say for a first attempt, I'm really impressed with it. Easily remains one of my favorite songs from my discography today. But then I decided, I was going to get this out there a bit more. It's too good to just keep a secret, right? Enter exhibit too many for me to count of my 121 IQ being absolute bullshit as an indicator of my intelligence. I ended up falling for the Beige Records scam and forked over $70 or so to get them promoting a handful of my songs. And they didn't even do this, save for Ignite. Even then, I only saw maybe 5% of the profit I was promised off their promotion of Ignite alone, and didn't get anything off the other 3 songs they gave them. Fortunately, all of which were already copyrighted before I handed them off to Beige Records, so they hope Hopefully you can't turn around one day and say I infringed on copyrights that were originally mine and not theirs. But on the off chance that their listeners on SoundCloud aren't bots like 99% of the platform seems to be, Ignite absolutely blows up next to any other original piece of my game about 3 times the number of plays on SoundCloud within a week that bruh, its next closest competitor, has on all platforms combined to this day. Who can blame the people who listen, though? The song absolutely slaps. After this, though, 2021 is not a particularly eventful year for my music, at least for the next half year or so. Just a bunch of stress-inducing projects for me that, for the most part, still got plenty of critics despite the sense of perfectionism I had about some of these. In particular, Bring You Down, the one song of this time that got anywhere at all. There's one song in my entire career that's seen me get so perfectionist, I'm legit tearing my hair out over the minor flaws of the song. Bring You Down is that song. And yeah, while it's one of my more commercially successful works, it stands out for no other reason. That doesn't represent any real landmark or shift in my discography. It's kind of like Avatar. Makes a shit ton of money, leaves no cultural impact. The shift does come in late 2021, however, when Hastaaja, song that mistakenly got named Chaplin, finally gets a successor to its ideas, although not a sequel. Paladin took this cinematic orchestral dubstep concept of Hastaaja and massively improved upon it, albeit trading out the stronger emphasis on the dubstep phaser bass for a much more melodic nature that, while simple for most of the song's run, it does evolve in the sense of the song. This and another orchestral/electronic fusion that I make by the end of the year, Dreamer, proved to have some of my longest work times of any song I ever made, but that time seems to actually paid off, as both songs find themselves among the favorites for my listeners. This said, at the recommendation of Carlos Delgado, who I worked with on those 2 songs, most of the features of those songs will probably become mainstays of what I'd like to make into my signature style for the future. And with that, is the end of this summary of my music's evolution in the last 5 years. Hopefully the next few years will see me grow a lot as an artist as well, and I hope to give you lots of great music in that time as well. So, thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Comment any thoughts down below. And, well, it's been a good 5 years for what it's worth, and let's hope for many more years of good music.